Hello, hello, little wombats, little creatures. Welcome to Lugal's world. We have Isaac from down the wombat hole here, and we're going to be unveiling the mysteries of astrology here. We're going to look at this is going to be an amazing reference for you to find. Have you ever wondered? I have not found anywhere online that has very succinctly given the houses and their interactions in the signs and the planets. I had never seen this. And Isaac loved the idea and wanted to come on here and serve our community here at Lugal's World with this valuable information. So thank you for stopping by. Please, if you like this work, please support it with any financial support or book either one of us for reading. The links are in the description. I'm going to start with a blessing for everyone who watches. We invoke the illumination of Christ. We invoke the protection of Michael over this sacred space. We thank all of the gods, all of the planets. We thank the all of the energies, our highest self, and the roots of the tree. We thank the underworld. We thank you for bringing the energy of Thoth and Hermes Trismegistus and all the best wisdom energies here with compassion, with energies that heal the earth. Everyone watching this would be nourished in their soul, in their body, soul, mind, and spirit. And this content would really help them and nourish what their soul is doing. And we thank you that everyone that is watching this is meant to, that you're not watching this by accident. Like this is like in your chart, in your, whether it's in the Akasha or in your astrology, know that this is like what you're supposed to be watching. Like your soul is called you here. And the algorithm has only worked through the divine. Everything is the divine putting on sock puppets. We're the sock puppet of the gods. So we're little puppets, and we're just becoming our higher self and gaining more and more freedom. So without further ado, Isaac, let's dig into this juicy topic.
Indeed. Thanks, Lugal. And thanks for having me as well. And thank you for that introduction. Yeah, so we thought we'd do a series sort of going through each of the astrological houses and then exploring how each planet and also the signs would manifest in that house. So we can get this sort of holistic perspective on what each of the houses means. When I come at the houses, I guess I approach it, I see the sky at the time of our birth as, you know, as the life cycle, I guess. So we start with the first house, go second, third, and then up to the visible sky from 7 to 12. But each stage, each section of the sky is a stage of the universal life cycle that each of us goes through. And so we can sort of map each house to a certain type of experience that we have in life. And so the first house is the first stage of life. So it's where we're first establishing what it is to be in human form, to have a soul within our body, to have an identity, to have a role within this collective world. And so the first house is where we really start to work our way through that and establish some sort of identity, I guess. So an identity is probably a really key word for the first house, which is also, we also link identity to the sun as well, I think. So let's say you have sun in the first house, you're going to have a very strong, very warm, very radiant identity and personality. That's just how you're going to be. You're going to embody what the sun is as a visible celestial archetype. So when we see planets in the first house, so if you only have one planet in the first house, particularly if it's close to your ascendant, you're going to embody that planet, you know, very strongly in an archetypal way, but also potentially in a literal physical appearance way. So there's a few great examples I use for sort of first house planets. If we take Donald Trump, for example, he has Mars conjunct his ascendant. Depending on what house system, that Mars will be either in the 12th house or the first house. Because it is conjunct his ascendant, we can sort of link it to the idea of what the first house represents, which is really started by the ascendant. And, you know, he is a very He's a very fiery personality. He's always on a war footing. He's always ready to go into battle. He doesn't mind if there's a bit of collateral damage. He's very masculine, very assertive, and he's a bit red. Literally, physically, appearance, he's a bit red, which is Mars, and Mars is the red planet of war. So just, so you get an example there about what it might seem if you have a planet very closely tied to the ascendant and the first house. So a few other examples off the top of my head. I think both Beyonce and Angelina Jolie have Venus exactly conjunct their ascendant, so right in their first house. And so let's say Angelina Jolie, she's considered by many to be the embodiment of feminine beauty. Very well-defined sense of beauty, very feminine, very graceful, has sort of strong values. It evokes this idea of like romantic desire. So you can see there how that Venus archetype is really embodied. And then with Beyonce, again, a very strong feminine figure, but she has Venus and Pluto conjunct her ascendant. Depending on that, she's got two potential birth times, but I use the one which puts Venus and Pluto on her ascendant because it makes sense in terms of how extreme a personality she is. So with Beyonce, you can see both the Venus and Pluto archetypes embodied in her. So very strong, intense, compelling femininity, which is always seeking to transform itself into something different. So yeah, there's a few examples about what it would look like having first house sort of planets. But there's a whole, if you look into a lot of the most prominent celebrity charts, you'll see quite often they'll have key planets very close to the ascendant. It sort of makes them leading figures or almost role models for these planetary archetypes that exist within society. And so we look up to these celebrity figures as really embodying Venus or Mars or the Sun or the Moon or these other sort of all these other planets. So let's say you had the Moon in the first house.
And I'm thinking now that we have the introduction, we can do chronologically each starting with the planets, the first to the last, and then the signs, the first to the last sign in its interaction with the first house. And we can just do a quick summary chronologically of each one so they can use this video to reference now that we have the introduction out of the way. So.
Yeah, perfect, because we've probably gone forever about this, so we want to keep it nice and short and sharp and helpful, don't we? Yeah, so I sort of gave the example starting with the Sun. You're going to be a very warm, radiant being, I guess. You're going to spread warmth to people. You're going to inspire people. You're going to lead because the Sun is the most visible sign, and everything, as we see it from a heliocentric perspective, everything revolves around the Sun. So the Sun in the first house, they'll play a leading role, and people will sort of almost revolve around them rather than vice versa. The shadow of that will be just being overly attention seeking and imposing yourself into every situation, because I'm the Sun, I will lead, I will shine, I'll make things warm, and you just impose yourself, almost too much where you're not welcome, or in a sort of a selfish or self-promoting way. So that might be how we can sort of see the different signs of the Sun in there.
So it's like overly sunny or something. Is it like blinding because it's like the Sun with the Sun?
Yeah, well put. Yeah, and that's one of there's this idea in some modes of astrology that when a planet is conjunct the Sun, it actually it disappears because the Sun just is so overpowering, it almost blocks out or hides that archetype. And so that let's say you have like Venus conjunct your Sun, which I do, and almost like that Venus goes into some sort of hidden underworld place by being so close to the Sun. So yeah, that's a really nice way to put it, because every planet has its sort of its strength or its light and its shadow, I guess. And yeah, the sun, it can be overbearing too much. It can burn, can't it? It can burn and even, cook in its most extreme.
So where would you rank it? Where would you rank the sun in the first house from like 1 to 10 in good or bad? I know there's so many other stuff in the chart, but if you had to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really like doing that. I sort of try and approach every archetype from just a moral perspective, and explain that archetype without putting any sort of value judgment on it, I guess. That's not to say that certain planets and certain houses.
Easy to difficult? Is that possible?
Sorry?
Is easy to difficult possible? Or how about if that archetype likes being there or not?
Interesting. Yeah, let's see how we go as we go through. Because and whether we actually find that sort of gnosis as we go, because it's not something that I automatically look to or think about. So yeah, for sure. So that's the sun. And so the moon. Well, what's the basic qualities of the moon? It's more nighttime orientated. So it's more the nighttime personality. What comes out when it's dark? What illuminates when when the sun is down? So someone with the moon in the first house might just enjoy the night more. Might be more of a nocturnal personality. Might feel more creative, more inspired, more themselves at night. So that's one way to put it. Their personality might be very changeable as well, because the moon, it fluctuates, it waxes and wanes. Sometimes, within the space of a month, it goes from almost invisible to illuminating the night sky as a full moon. So there is that changeability, particularly because it's the moon. There's an emotional changeability there as well. So they might be very moody, moon mood. That's probably where the word comes from. So that's probably one of the main defining qualities, I guess, of the moon in the first house. But also very emotionally receptive. So very easily picks up on emotions. Just naturally nurturing, naturally will just fall into the mother archetype very easily, because that we understand the moon primarily as representing the mother archetypally. We often see our impression or experiences of the mother through our moon placement, and so a moon there will be very much drawn towards playing that role. I guess moon in the first house will be very much impacted by events such as full moons and eclipses. You're probably going to feel those events much more and feel that fluctuation much more during those times. That's probably one way I would do it as well. Other things for the moon before we move on. You might feel less attached to your sun identity because your moon's more prominent. You might not feel wherever your sun is so much, unless you did have the sun, unless you were a new moon, you had the sun there as well. So that's one thing we might sort of see come out. So again, there's nothing sort of inherently good or bad I'd see there, but just more being aware, particularly, if you do have other aspects in your chart which might lead you to have extremes in your personality, particularly emotionally extremes in your personality, then a moon in the first house will probably act to emphasize that and make those placements a bit more problematic and harder to deal, or take more energy to negotiate, if that makes sense. Anything to add before we move on to the next one?
No.
Lovely. So Mercury in the first house, I was someone who just wants to communicate. Your natural state is to communicate. You want to exchange information. You're just naturally blessed in the ability to articulate difficult concepts and explain them, pass that information on to other people, to rationalize a situation very quickly, just in a constant state of being tactical and clever, I guess. And you just do that very intrinsically. It just happens to you naturally. So you're mercurial, literally, with this idea about what it is to be a mercurial figure. Mercury in the first house, particularly closely ascendant, will be very mercurial. The downside about that, so the extremes about that, the shadow would be just overly tactical to the point of being, calculating, even cunning, very sneaky, deceitful, even just, very amoral and just being very rational, almost too rational without considering what the emotional consequences in particular of certain modes of communication or sharing certain types of information. And so you're not able to really maybe pick up on those things so well. You might be very, very opportunistic, which can be both good and bad. So if you're quick-witted, you'll seize opportunities, but then that can also be move into opportunistic and exploiting other people as well. And there's a bit of, I guess, a know-it-all aspect might come in as well. Overly intellectual. You're taking so much information. If you don't have that moral grounding, you can be just like, a bit insufferable, finishing everyone's sentences, explaining, like mansplaining things to people, that sort of thing. So that's how I see Mercury in the first house. Cool. So let's do Venus and Mars sort of as a duo. So they are the typical masculine and feminine polarity of our personality. I guess we see the young man in Mars. We see the young woman in Venus. So we talked about 2 Venus examples. You can see there how they, very defined, strong idea of femininity and beauty, because Venus is our ideas about beauty. You can see how that comes through in those 2 examples. And so, if having either Venus or Mars close to the ascendant would be embodying femininity and masculinity very, very closely. So Venus would be someone who I'd say, makes friends very easily. Is very charming, very attractive, very artistic, and just very, very gracious and well-meaning, and doesn't cause conflict. The shadow of that would be, all appearance, no substance, I guess. You look nice, you speak well, you make people feel good, but there's not really much going on underneath. So that's, one of the shadowy aspects. And then just being, being very vain and too much in love with one's own beauty and one's own desires and one's own personal values. And so, and just an innocence and a naivety, I guess, which as a shadow sounds pretty good and pretty harmless. But sort of can be then damaging if it then plays into other challenging planetary aspects as well. And so the polarity of that with Mars is just a very, very assertive, confident, courageous individual. Feels very masculine because they impose themselves very readily and easily on other people and impose themselves, their own identity into the world. They like confrontation. They'll very easily go into battle for something, whether it's themselves or someone else or an idea or a worldview, very quickly to just take on a fight if it pops up. They'll just do it very, very naturally. And then the shadow of that will be falling into aggression or anger or resentment or those sort of mindsets very quickly without sort of realizing it. And that can lead to, more obvious damage, social damage like violence, hurt, emotional hurt, and even just like war.
It seems to take a more overt quality, an overt kind of energy, like being in the first house.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, for sure.
I mean, for everything, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think Trump's such a great example about that. He so perfectly embodies what it is to have Mars being central to your identity and who you are. So, yeah. All right, so let's do Jupiter now. So Jupiter is.
By the way, we love you, Jupiter. Thank you for your energies on this channel and blessing our channel. We give so much honor to your beauty and your expansion, and we channel the yellow sapphire energy through this channel and through everyone who's watching, and may be blessed by the benevolence and grace of Jupiter and all that it represents. and have favor, and may that karma, negative karma, when it needs to be eliminated at the right time, in the right place, in the right way, at the appointed time. Many blessings. Continue.
Yeah, thank you. And such a potent time to be drawing on Jupiter, on the Jupiter archetype, on the Jupiter spiritual, on the Jupiter spirit, I guess, because we have Jupiter Uranus conjuncting at the end of April, and so the more we can tap into the Jupiterian spirit in the lead up to that is incredibly important. And so people with Jupiter in their first house near their ascendant will be crucial in the next few months. So if you're watching that, you know, you have, and you do have a very strong Jupiter, whether it's in your first house or in other ways. Yeah, this is really your time to step up and instill the world with hope, with optimism, with trustworthiness, with faith. All these things we associate with Jupiter. And so someone who has Jupiter in their first house, they're going to be a very naturally positive. They're going to have a naturally positive outlook on life. They're hopeful. They're optimistic. You know, they might even take on this sort of guru figure to an extent, because Jupiter does represent the spiritual guru. So
how Jupiter is this water bottle? How Jupiter is this, being like this big and like super orange?
Yeah, expansive and abundant, and yes, almost exaggerated to some extent. Yeah,
people say as everything's bigger in Texas, everything's bigger in Jupiter. You need to make that T-shirt available to people.
And so Jupiter, it likes to expand. It says yes. Like Jupiter says yes, Saturn says no. Saturn says no, you have to do that. I'm going to make sure I put the restrictions in place that you do that properly.
It's the big shortcuts. It's the big gulp of the planets. It's the big gulp.
Love it. Yeah, for sure. Always need more. And so what Jupiter in the first, you know, someone who always will be saying yes to things, so they might burn out easily. They might sort of take on too much. They might be so I guess Jupiter in the first house, Jupiter is a lot to do with worship, the idea of worship, the idea of honoring something greater than us, tapping into spirit. So in the first house, it can always lead to self worship, so worship of the self, seeing one as the god, which isn't necessarily, you know, it doesn't have to be a bad thing, but certainly with Jupiter and taking things to excess, you can see how that can turn into the guru, and then you know, almost like the cult leader archetypal figure as well can come from a very strong Jupiter. I bet
Sadhguru has a very strong Jupiter Sun connection.
I feel like especially you see how Sun close to Jupiter in the first house would just could be really overbearing, like leader, Jupiterian like leader figure who can just very easily bring people in with their energy, but that has to be really controlled. So Jupiter
reminds me of some of the it reminds me of like the Islamic, some of the like Iranian worship leaders are kind of there. They have like a religious figure, or is it kind of like the Pope?
Yeah, nice. Yeah. You can see, for sure, absolutely. I think those sort of figures are really, we can best capture them as in the Jupiterian archetype, can't we? Yeah, for sure.
No, but in the sun, with the sun interacting with it, or is it not that?
Not sure. You have to sort of look at a chart, but yeah, I can see how that.
Just studying like the energy of like the sun would bring it. It'd be more just about the person. So like I'm thinking first house Jupiter would make them fully in the spotlight, or would it be a little bit different than that?
Not sure. Yeah, I can see how that could work.
Mm.
Just a few other things about Jupiter before we move on. So
yeah,
I have Jupiter exactly square Mercury, and that often manifests as this idea of like sermonizing or being somewhat like condescending, even superior. So that's something I always have to watch out. And so then first house Jupiter would be very careful about slipping into those modes of like holier than thou and sort of moral superiority. So that's be one of the main things to sort of be mindful of with someone with a very strong Jupiter. And I can sort of speak personally about that as well. So yeah, Should we do Saturn, which is one of my favorites? So what's Saturn? Saturn is, as I said, it says no. It makes sure things are done the hard way, which is also the correct way, that no shortcuts are taken. But Saturn is, it's the Satan archetype, and Satan is the adversary. It plays very deliberately and consciously, plays the adversarial role. And so Saturn in the first house is someone who embodies the quote unquote great adversary. You might feel like you represent this sort of idea of Satan in your life.
Is that like a repo man or something? The collections agency or something?
yeah, potentially that makes sense. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I just imagine how that would manifest. So I think
those of you with the sun in the sun on their or the first house on their. Wait, no, continue. What are you saying?
Yeah. So there's two examples of people who have Saturn right near their ascendant that I can think of. Bono from U2 and also Jared Leto. So they both have Saturn within a few degrees of their ascendant, I'm pretty sure. So we can sort of see they're both very dark. They have a sort of darkness to their demeanor. You can sort of look at their music. There is a sort of deliberately antagonistic role. Like Bono is a bit more emotional, whereas like Jared Leto is quite, there's a lot of deliberately playing that adversarial role and standing against something in their music. I think that's the one way to understand how Saturn might be expressed in the first house as that figure. But then there's also the personal aspects about dealing with that, which would be so Saturn is about vulnerability. Often is where we feel most vulnerable, most challenged, most tested, most sort of put on trial. It's like we're being examined about wherever Saturn is in our chart and the planets that are aspects. So someone who's Saturn in the first house will actually have to go through a lot of vulnerability about who they are, vulnerability about the self. Who am I? Am I someone? Am I anything else apart from just this, this celestial arrangement? What do I stand for?
So it seems like it's limiting their building up of their ego. So there's more resistance in the creation of their ego. Would that be an accurate representation?
Nice. Yeah. So one word I think about with Saturn is cultivation. It's something that's very deliberate and takes time. So in the Saturn in the first house, your ego would have to be cultivated over time and really have to be developed very purposely and slowly, as opposed to other manifestations of that planet. And so it's going to be a longer process for you to be optimistic, to have a hopeful outlook on life, to sort of find silver linings, to trust yourself, to trust other people, and to sort of see the goodness in life. It's not that you can't do that, but it's going to be a slower process. It's going to be your main test over life, is to really come into yourself and understand who you are. So that's one. So I think in that sense, maybe we can definitely frame Saturn as in the first house as potentially one of the most problematic, because it really does create vulnerabilities and tests about who we are, the very essence about who we are. So I can see that placement seeming like it's very difficult and hard to work through. But the thing about Saturn is it produces results. Saturn is about producing tangible, lasting results. And so the end of that is that you have a stronger sense of identity and self than any other planet.
Wow.
In the first house.
That's so awesome. We thank you, Saturn, for that. Yeah. And let's just take a moment to give thanks for the place that Saturn is in our lives. We thank you, Saturn, for all your limitations and restrictions. We give honor to you. We thank you for this beautiful energy that you bring to us, even though it's misunderstood. And all of those with Saturn in the first house, we thank you for them, and we thank you for giving them the strongest sense of self. Aho and amen.
Lovely. Yeah, lovely. Yeah, and I really resonate with the Saturn archetype. I have it. Well, we both have Saturn right at the top of our of the sky when we're born. So it's very prominent, one of the most prominent archetypes of our personality. And I have it shining my sun, Venus, and Mars. So I feel that discipline and influence in everything I do. It's always there. It's in my ninth house. So there's a spirituality to it, and always behind it, and this sort of progress towards higher learning and higher knowledge, which I really love. And I've sort of, the more I've understood my own astrology, the more I give thanks to Saturn in myself and the role that it plays in just keeping what is otherwise quite a volatile, extreme personality in check. Yeah. Speaking of volatile,
I also want to encourage people that if you find yourself with places of restriction, whether it's parents or it's governments or it's doesn't matter at your workplace, know that you're not dealing with humans. Those are the sock puppets. You're dealing with the divine, with the aspects of the divine, with the gods. So consider looking up a Saturn mantra or a Saturn ritual and reconciling with that energy if you have some negative karma there. And you can apply that to any aspect in your chart. This is why astrology is so vital to understanding where you are in this incarnation and what to do with it. It's very important. And so if you're really valuing this video, please book a session with Isaac and get some real personal one-on-one advice. I mean, these videos are a great reference, but going with someone who's like really pours their heart and soul into this can really get you the results that you want. So thank you for tuning in this far. And if you found this very useful, please consider donating or check out the other stuff on my channel, booking a tarot session or whatnot. I really appreciate your support. And if you found this video, check out all the other references on spiritual content and be part of Lugal's World, this beautiful community that I'm building. Please fill the comments with your beautiful thoughts, disagreements, whatever you want to put there, because it's going to benefit other people, create a synergy. And we're really trying to bring spiritualize the earth, get people aware of the divine elements, and kind of be contrast the over materialization period of the Kali Yuga and bring out more of a spiritual subtleties to come back to the populace of whoever watching this. So thank you. Please continue. So.
Lovely, thanks, Lugal. Yeah, let's run through the outer planets then and what they might look like. So Uranus will be someone who's just values freedom and independence and uniqueness. So you know they'd be very hard to tie down. They'd be very spontaneous. They change suddenly. So I have a friend who has a first house stellium but has Uranus the closest to their ascendant, and they just change their appearance very obviously and suddenly, just all the time. You know, suddenly they'll have different hair, or they'll have a new very obvious tattoo, stuff like that. You'll just be drawn to change, but not the plutonic change, the sort of sudden, over the top, obvious type of change. That's just who you are. You'll be drawn to do that, to be that person, to be very unique, to have a uniqueness, sometimes an exaggerated uniqueness, an exaggerated freedom and sense of need to be liberated, need to constantly be liberating yourself from things. But the positive of that is sort of being a pioneer, leading people into new places, showing the way, showing what is possible. Uranus, the modern ruler of Aquarius, it's about social progress, moving people forward in a progressive way. So yeah, but then the shadow of that is just you struggling with emotions. So an emotional detachment is probably, because we don't really associate emotions with Uranus. It just does things suddenly for the sake of change without really thinking about the consequences, and how that might be quite difficult for a lot of people emotionally and spiritually to deal with these sudden changes. So that's
and by the way, Audrey Hepburn is one of those people, and Nikola Tesla, Johnny Depp, Bill Gates. Yeah, so that James Dean, Leonardo DiCaprio, makes sense that they're actors. Jay-Z, Kurt Cobain, Natalie Portman, Those, just to name a few of some famous people with this placement.
So that's Uranus, was it? Sorry.
Uranus in the first house.
Okay, yeah, cool. Great examples there. Yeah, I think these celebrity examples are often really helpful to understand the essence of these planets and how it manifests. Yeah, cool. All right, let's do, so Neptune. Neptune, the first house, I'd say someone who's very hard to define. Sort of, they seem to almost like shapeshift a bit. So when I try and start to describe Neptune, I start by saying it's very hard to describe, because that's what it is. It exists in a realm, in a spiritual, unseen sort of realm, which is why we associate it often with the 12th house and Pisces, because it gets to that non-material parts of life, I guess, which we don't often pick up with our normal senses. And so I think Neptune really pulls at that. So be someone who has a lot of intuition, a lot of spiritual guidance. It's like they almost like float through life, just guided by their intuition, guided by spirit. Very adaptive. It's like, oh, I'm in this environment now. I'll adapt to that environment. Suddenly I'm over here. I'll adapt to this. So it's easily able to navigate and negotiate.
Kardashian, Marilyn Monroe, Ariana Grande,
Nice.
Scarlett Johansson, Nicole Kidman, Kylie Jenner, Chris Evans, Cristiano Ronaldo.
Ooh, nice one. I think maybe Ariana Grande has like Uranus and Neptune conjunct her ascendant, something ridiculous like that. I think Bjork has Neptune on her ascendant as well.
She has my birthday.
Really? That's nice.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
All right, so you can see the benefits of Neptune. So Neptune in the first house, someone who gullible, easily led astray because they're always looking for signs, looking for the hidden meaning. That's something that can be easily manipulated, I guess, or led. Yeah, so seduced is maybe one way to put it. Again, so first house is bringing things back to the self. So the negative of Neptune is fantasy. Well, that's not negative. It's escape from reality. Neptune wants to escape the mundane reality. It wants to transcend. It wants to elevate itself. It wants to imagine. It's like a higher octave of Jupiter in the sense of expanding horizons and imagining what is possible. The extremes of that is just breaking down the things which separate other things. So we're in a very Neptunian phase of the world right now because borders and barriers are being broken down and things are flowing into things they haven't been before. So we can see Neptune's influence, or we can see all the other planets in the world, but particularly Neptune at the moment, I think. So that can be deceiving the self, or having a misleading, fictitious idea about who we are and the self, and deluding yourself, lying to yourself, not facing up to certain Saturnian realities, I guess. Definitely someone who's prone to addiction, I'd say. And I can speak personally on a lot of this stuff because I have Neptune transiting literally the degree of my ascendant right now. So the last few years have been basically come to terms with being someone who has Neptune on their first house. And so the old idea of myself has completely broken down. I've moved from the city to the country, changed, my appearance has changed. I've become basically addicted to the ocean. So Neptune is the ocean. So there's strong themes of water to do with Neptune as well. So Neptune first house would be someone who has an affinity, some sort of deep affinity with water or the ocean or the sea. I think that would be a really thing as well. And then the fluidity is sort of losing yourself, not having that sense of self, being led astray, becoming lost in life, and not having a really strong attachment to anything tangible and concrete. So yeah, there's definitely something to be aware of, that that trickier side of Neptune would really come out in the first house for sure. And so, yeah, those sort of people need other people with a strong, Saturnian influence, for want of a better word, where they provide structure and refinement and discipline and clear boundaries. Neptunian people really need that. Cool. Shall we move to the Lord of the Underworld?
Yeah.
So last outer planet. So Pluto. What's the main sort of qualities of someone who's Pluto? So powerful, intense. This a little of like this sort of darkness or deepness, not the great word, of them. So very captivating and charismatic, compelling. People just like can't resist sort of watching or following these people.
Beyonce.
Yeah, Beyonce is such a good example, I think. Yeah, for sure. So they'd have, which you embody Pluto. Pluto is about Keanu Reeves. Nice. Yeah. I can see that in his yeah. Nice. So someone who's very
Dalai Lama too.
Nice. Yeah. So this person will be very comfortable with embracing or navigating the most intense aspects, the most intense, extreme, hidden aspects of life. They easily be able to just go down into the underworld. Pluto is the Lord of the Underworld. They'd be able to descend very easily into that realm and then come back up and still be themselves. So yeah, I guess the shadow of that would just be being too much darkness, too much intensity, too powerful, overpowering, abuse of power, power tripping, control freak, maybe. And then especially as someone who's just feared, intensely intimidating and feared, a tyrant, a tyrant who just exerts control over everything, micromanages every aspect of life. So Pluto in the first house would be, I said, along with Mars, they'd have the most power to be obviously destructive and damaging. So I think there's definitely a responsibility for someone who has Pluto in the first house, particularly near their ascendant, in being aware of just how easily you can exert your power and influence over people around you, and how easily you can be drawn into the darkness, into the underworld, into dark subjects, and to not get to not become disorientated or too lost in that darkness. So yeah, really important thing for Plutonic personalities to keep in mind, I'd say. So that's the main planet. So maybe just do very quickly like Chiron and the North Node as well, because I think they're the deeper planetary archetype. So Chiron is interesting. You're going to have this. Chiron is the wounded healer, obviously. So the archetype is someone who holds these wounds from birth, very, very deep wounds, and has their identity in their wounds, but then is able to overcome those wounds and becomes a powerful healer because of the ability to face one's own hurt and trauma and to come to terms with that and then use it as a source of healing. So they'd be people who would embody to some extent trauma. They'd hold their trauma very obviously and openly and close to themselves. They might even, unfortunately, they might identify with their trauma as well, quite strongly.
Winfrey. That Selena Gomez, Shakira, Heath Ledger.
Well, Heath Ledger's a good one.
Bill Clinton, James Dean, J.K. Rowling.
Nice.
Here.
Yeah, and so the positive, you can see how identifying with someone's trauma would be the obvious negative or the shadow of Chiron in the first house, but the ability to be a healer, to literally have your identity as someone who heals, that's the evolutionary purpose, I guess, of having Chiron intrinsically to do with your personality. So I can see that being an immensely powerful placement for someone who's able to accept that they have this hurt and trauma as part of themselves, who's able to overcome that and then turn that into healing. And then Rahu, so the North Node. So I sort of think about the North Node as a underlying life trajectory, life mission, or like almost evolutionary purpose, we have all this stuff going on in our charts, all these other planets. If we want to just bring things back to basics and get just a concrete idea of what direction we should be heading, I think Rahu is the best planet. It's not a planet, it's it's the point, the abstraction where the parts of the sun and moon interact, and so that's when eclipse happens, when they interact. But so it's our purpose. If we need to sort of understand our underlying or overarching purpose, I think it gets to where our north node is. And so then someone with north node close to their ascendant. So I have Rahu 8 degrees away from my ascendant. I'm very self-focused, and a lot of people would see that as someone who's very selfish. But I know that I'm primarily here to work on myself, to be a very independent, proud and confident individual, very self-sufficient. I say someone who has Rahu would just be they wouldn't rely. They'd feel like they're being held back every time, or almost a failing if they become reliant on other people. And
I wanted to say something quickly about, according to anthroposophy, this is the epoch that we're in right now, where the individual, since Golgotha, what Christ did is we're individualizing, we're crystallizing in the self in this time. This is like the evolutionary process from that belief system. Continue.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, and so with Rahu in the first house, you'd have the South Node Ketu in the 7th house, which is, associated with sort of past, karma, sort of what you're moving away from. So someone with Rahu in the first house probably wouldn't find themselves inclined to relationships or to partnerships. They want to do things themselves. And so one of the main difficulties, I guess, with Rahu in the first house is navigating short relationships, which you feel like you could stay in longer, but you need to move on because you need to keep being yourself. You need to keep being an independent person. So there's a need to detach from other people and be in harmonious, mutual relationships with other people, because you need to work on yourself. So as someone who has that placement, I'm constantly mindful about not getting held back in relationships as much as I might like to for emotional, physical, sexual reasons. That's just not my path, my journey. So yeah, I've got a lot to say on Rahu in the first house. It can be difficult, but it can it gives you space to really work on yourself and create a really defined, even out there personality, with a plutonic edge to it, I guess. Definitely, I can see how that will sort of come in. But yeah, someone who gets used to not being reliant on other people and really cultivating themselves. So yeah, that's our wrap of the planets in the first house. Anything you'd like to add to that?
I would like to conclude the video. So thank you everyone who tuned in. If you enjoyed this content, please explain your relations, where your planets are interacting with the first house or where they aren't. Tell us your thoughts. Thank you for subscribing, for liking, for booking a session with Isaac through the link. Thank you for your support, for making this video possible. Any financial or booking a session, we really appreciate it. I do tarot as well, so we can figure out some of those mysteries in your life that you need answers to. Also check out, I have a full wealth of a lot of other things on my channel. I do free Medicine Buddha healing if you need that. I'm thinking about coming here live and we can chant together, as well as if you have anyone that you think would be good for this channel to be invited to speak here, or any possible ideas of discussion, please put them in the comments. I really appreciate you making this community beautiful, my little creatures. So everyone have a beautiful day or night wherever you are, and go check out my friend here. So peace, many blessings.